Like, I'm not a coffee drinker. And they're like, how do you like get up in the morning and like all this stuff? And I was like, I'm like literally excited about life. Like, I don't even sleep. I don't remember the last time I like heard my alarm in the morning. Like, my alarm woke me up. I get up before my alarm because I'm so ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think there is that for everybody. There's like a thing that is on your heart, that's on your mind, that if you're doing that, you're just so excited about what you're gonna do that day that you can barely sleep.
Hi guys, welcome in to MPods. We're super excited about this interview. We're here with Nosa, and yeah, let's just jump right in. Nosa, can you introduce yourself and what you do at Reforge Robotics?
Yeah, so I'm Nosa. I'm the founder and CEO of Reforge Robotics. And we're currently a very small team. We're a team of 3, so I do a lot of stuff at Reforge Robotics. So I say I do algorithm development, customer development, which is very different from algorithm development, and then everything else. So like accounting, taxes, and everything. But yeah, I think my primary role is doing a lot of the business side things. Also like communicating the engineering to our customers and things like that. Yeah.
And yeah, I saw Kawasaki was like one of your partners potentially.
Yeah. So we work with different robot brands. So we use KUKA, Kawasaki, ABB, and then I think there's another one that we kind of work with. So we're robot agnostic. So we write software on top of these robots to make them more precise. And our whole idea is that once you can use a robot to do the main job in manufacturing, you can do a lot of other side jobs that basically you can build an autonomous factory with just robots. And that's the vision that we're pushing towards, is like autonomous robotic manufacturing, which hasn't been possible before.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So what was the problem that you were addressing with Reforge Robotics?
Yeah, so the big problem, there's a few sort of like kernels of the problem. I think the thrust that's in everything is trying to make manufacturing cheaper, especially in the US. So we have exported our manufacturing industry over maybe the last 4 decades. So starting in the 1970s to like now, we've exported a lot of manufacturing that used to be done here. And a lot of people don't think about this as much, but like one of the reasons why we won World War II was because of the manufacturing and like technological prowess of the United States. But that doesn't exist now. And so one of the ways to do that, to bring that back here, is by being able to reduce the cost of manufacturing things. And a lot of the cost is actually in labor, which is why we can't compete with a lot of other places, because labor is super expensive here. But if you have autonomous robots doing manufacturing, then you don't have that much labor. It's still going to be labor involved, but you don't have that much labor. So that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is we see that there's a whole big world out there, and there's a lot of people who don't have access to manufacturing. And if we reduce the cost of manufacturing, that means more people will get access to it. So there's probably about 7 billion people out of the 8 billion-ish people on the planet that don't have access to like metal manufactured goods. And so we're trying to see if we can bring that type of capability to them. So I'm originally from West Africa. I grew up in Nigeria. And so that's also a passion of mine, is to like bring this type of thing back home.
Yeah. Definitely. Also, because we saw in some of your blogs and the website of the startup, I noticed that you were talking about how a lot of startups right now are focusing on the software, robotic software, instead of the hardware problem. The challenges are ignored a lot of times. So can you elaborate to our audiences about what is that exactly and how you are trying to solve that problem?
Yeah. So I think because of 2 things. One is just how easy it is to write software compared to like building hardware. And then 2 is the also economic incentive. So in the last 20 years, venture capital has really loved software businesses because they aren't that capital intensive. They are basically zero marginal cost. So you write the software once and then it's like infinitely replicable. And so we have this problem. At the same time, manufacturing is shifting out of the US. We have this software coming in, and it's like super easy to write. You can build Facebook, you can build Google, you can build these software platforms that can be huge. And so investors just like focused on that. And I think we lost track of the physical things in the world that we want to build in order to like actually make things, actually make cars, actually make real things in the real world, atoms versus bits. And so that's one bit of it, is that transition to the software, internet software space. But there is, and to some extent, like some people make the argument that manufacturing is solved. We know how to build stuff. There are robotics companies that build hundreds of thousands of robots per year. It's okay, great. But those robots are very limited in what they can do. And the thing that will actually increase the capability of those robots is software. But not software for the internet, software for hardware. And so that's how we're thinking about it, is like, there are like a ton of optimizations from the software perspective when you're thinking about hardware, when you're trying to think about building software into hardware so that hardware can do more. And that's what I learned during my PhD, was that like we had these 3D printers that we were working with, and we're trying to make additive manufacturing better. And we realized that without adding any hardware to the machine itself, we could improve it tremendously by just using software. So we invented basically like some physics simulation software that predicts how the machine's going to vibrate. And then we have these small, like tiny counter motions that counteract that vibration to have zero vibration. And so the machine performs way better. And that's all in software. And so there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit, maybe not low-hanging fruit, but there's a lot of fruit in like using software to improve our current hardware capabilities. And I think that then starts to unlock the design space for hardware. Because when you know that software can do part of what you want the hardware to do, it can make the hardware more performant. Then what types of hardware can you design? What types of robots can you now design to do different things? Can you make them lighter? Can you make them cheaper? Can you make them do more? That's like the space that we want to explore, is like software, but for building things in the real world.
Right.
Yeah.
I really think that's an interesting point, because personally I've been also like following the 3D printing, and then I think with all the like open source code, and people can literally, I think it has a great impact in like medical field, right? Like building prosthetic arms or anything like that. So I think in one of your LinkedIn posts, I noticed that you mentioned about like experience teaching Ghana, and then like how it's allowed you to see the impact of 3D printing. And so can you like talk a little more about like the idea behind your startup Print Geniuses, and how it helps streamline 3D, like what you said, using software to have impact in hardware?
Yeah. So yeah, I worked on Print Genius, which is a startup that I started when I was just leaving Michigan, actually. It was like the last year of my PhD. And a friend from Stanford and I worked on that company. And I'd say the kernel of that idea was coming out of my PhD. It was like we had spent some time working on improving 3D printing, and we had started to see this take off in 3D printing in terms of you could now use machines that cost $100K, $1,000, or maybe even less than $1,000 to do the same job as a machine that used to cost $10,000 or tens of thousands of dollars. And so we were like, okay, we think it's about to take off. We think 3D printing is about to take off. And so it's like, what would you do if you knew 3D printing was about to take off? And so we set out to we started talking with a lot of like 3D printing shops. So there are maybe like 3,000, maybe more now, but at the time, like 3,000 shops that do contract 3D printing for anyone. So if you wanted something 3D printed, you can go online and Google 3D printing shops around me, and then you can find someone. So we're like, okay, how can we make their lives easier? What kind of problems can we solve for them? And one of the things that kept coming up in those calls was like, it's really hard to connect with customers and like really educate them on what 3D printing can do, what 3D printing can't do. And there's also a lot of friction in just communicating with customers. So it's like a lot of things were done via email, and it wasn't very efficient. When someone wanted something printed, instead of just getting a quote immediately online, you would have to send the part to the company, and then they would process it and then send you back some quote of like how much it's going to cost, and you have the back and forth over email. And so we're like, okay, we want to streamline that. And so we basically built like back office software for 3D print shops. And there are a few print shops that started using it, and then we were like, okay, let's go see if we can like raise money and like kind of scale this up. And that's when we started coming into the problem of, is this like a venture backable business? Like it was going to be a business, but is it a venture backable business? And we realized that it wasn't because, like I said, there's 3,000 3D print shops. If you're charging them, I don't know, $200 a month, you can't get to 100 million in revenue. And I think the investors didn't see that return profile that they were looking for. And we also wanted to build a large business. And so it's still running, it's still like there, but we didn't pursue it as a business that we wanted it to be. And that's when I started working on Reforge Robotics, and my friends working on like a healthcare type startup. But yeah, I think the experience that I had in Michigan and seeing that 3D printing was having a good trajectory was what inspired that business, and kind of talking with customers there. But yeah, I think it's still left to be seen whether 3D printing is going to take off in the way we thought it was. So we'll see.
Yeah. And so that was for the like polymer 3D printing, and now you're working on the metal like 3D printing, manufacturing in a lot of the commodities that we have manufactured today. What are some of the main like commercial applications of things that are printed with metal manufacturing, with the metal 3D printing and CNC machines, and what's the opportunity there for Reforge Robotics? Yeah,
so Reforge Robotics is focused on subtractive manufacturing actually. So we are like, most things that are made, so like your laptop, components that go into cars and so on, they start off as a block of metal, and that block of metal basically gets carved into some shape that some engineer designed. And that process is called CNC machining. And so we are using a robot to do that process, whereas before you used to use these like $1 million CNC machines that are huge, gigantic, and like super massive, but weren't very flexible and can't do more than just that thing. So if we use a robot to do that, the robot can do that and do more things. So I think to answer your question around like what applications 3D printing, metal 3D printing has, I think it mostly is in like aerospace. So there's a company actually called Relativity Space. I don't know if you know of them. No? Okay. No. But they're like 3D printing rockets. Yeah. Yeah. So it's 3D printing, but they're basically like welding like wired metal. So they like melt the metal and then they weld it in the shape that, of a rocket sort of nozzle. And so there's a company that's doing that. So it's really popular in aerospace because you have all these sort of one-off parts that you don't mind paying a lot to make. So if you're making like an engine for a rocket, the rocket's going to cost you like $1 billion to make. And so if you spend $100,000 on an engine, it like doesn't matter. So the problem with like 3D printing in general is it's really expensive to do, and the volume is not as high. So you can't use it for like mass manufacturing. You can't use it to make iPhones, for example. And so a lot of like aerospace parts, some companies are using this company called Divergent 3D that's using it to make automotive parts, like really bespoke, like fancy cars. You only make, I don't know, 200 of the cars, right? So like really fancy high-end quality. Yeah. And then they're also being used for like replacement parts. So like parts that either like the product was made a very long time ago, and so they're not currently making like new parts every year for that product. And so it just makes sense if someone needs a replacement part, you just print one thing and then you send it to that customer. So that's one use case. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different things that people are experimenting with, but I think it's still a early technology. So people are still trying to figure out the best applications for it. But I would say automotive and aerospace are like big areas where it's really being explored to make useful things there. Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. That was absolutely fascinating about the applications that Reforge could have. And I'd like to just take us back just a bit. So you did your undergrad at Stanford in, was it mechanical engineering? That's right. And then you did your PhD at Michigan. And just winding back the clock a bit, could you tell us a bit more about like the critical experiences that you had at Michigan and how they led to your success? Yeah, this is going to sound interesting, but I think the biggest thing Michigan taught me was that I didn't want to do research. And it's not, I don't think it's like Michigan specific. Yeah. I think there were probably a lot of places that I would have gone to that I would have learned that same lesson. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so Stanford was like very, very entrepreneurial. I think the general like ethos and vibe is like how can we change the world? Like people are like thinking about that. People are like dropping out to try things. Maybe a really good example, and maybe this is a shout out to the Michigan folks who try to change this, but a good example is like at Stanford, and I think at other places, maybe Harvard, MIT, you can take time off of school for an indefinite amount of time. So you can just say, I want to leave, and they'll be like, okay, come back anytime.
So nice.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take gap years.
Exactly. And that's very permissive, right? And so that's why you see Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they left like Harvard and they said they dropped out, but in reality, they can go back anytime. They can go back and complete their degree anytime. Same thing with Stanford. I think there's the guys from DoorDash left and basically they can come back anytime. And so it's very permissive. Whereas Michigan, I wanted to go to Ghana to teach for a year and I actually could not. I could only go for 6 months because Michigan only allows you to take 6 months off of school unless you have some, I don't know, medical reason or something like that. And I think, yeah, there's some ways that it was like rigid. And then also on the research side, I came into doing a PhD because I was like, okay, like I want to learn more, one, and I want to figure out problems that like I can solve for like real people and have an impact on the world. And I thought, I don't know why I thought this, but when coming out of undergrad, I thought that a PhD might be a good place to have the learning and like really figure out problems that I could solve. But it turned out to be more like a paper machine. And what I mean by that is that it is a machine to produce research papers, which again is most PhD programs, but I think not at places like Stanford or MIT or like really like high impact places. So yeah, I think my journey at Michigan was like, I came in this very bright-eyed grad student and I was like, oh, I'm going to change the world here. And realized through that process that it was a very different expectation that they had. And the expectation was more like, okay, how can we publish papers that are impactful for the scientific community, but maybe we don't care as much about the impact that it has on real people's lives. That's academia takes the stance of that's for other people to do. We produce the background research that's needed to be able to do that. We don't actually go into commercializing. There's more and more people who are commercializing now, but I think it's few and far between. Like it's mostly publishing papers. And I realized very quickly, oh, like this is not, I don't want to publish papers and not have a real impact. And so that actually, in a way, like I guess in theory, I could have started a company after leaving Stanford. But after leaving Michigan, I was like, oh, I really need to start a company now because I don't want to do that. I don't want to do the research. So I was like, okay, we need to go directly into entrepreneurship. And that's what I did.
Yeah. Just a quick follow-up question because we're both graduating and there are a lot of audiences are deciding like what they're going to do after graduation. And some of them are deciding to maybe build their own company versus go to a corporate or do a grad school. So what would you say is important in deciding like which path you go into?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is probably like your risk tolerance. And how do I describe this as one thing? I guess, and your circumstance. So my circumstance was really unique in that I didn't have any debt from undergrad. Obviously didn't have any debt from grad school, so I'm like debt free. Like my parents have a house in Houston, so if all else fails, I can go to my parents' house and just hang out there for a while. So I think even though it was still scary to jump and do entrepreneurship, I was like, I have nothing to lose here. So for context, I was offered this job at Amazon Robotics, this really nice high paying job coming out of grad school. It's, oh yeah, you made it, you've done it, Amazon, it's great. And I turned that down because I was like, I feel like life is too short to do something that, not that I wasn't excited about it, but like something that isn't what I feel like my calling is. And again, I didn't have debt, I didn't have anything pulling me down. My fiance, girlfriend at the time, but fiance now, was very encouraging. She was like, yeah, you should do this. It seems like you really want to do this. So I say all those things come into play, but I think I personally, I guess, know a lot of older people who like didn't take a chance at doing something that they want to do and regretted it later on. And this is like a very common experience. A lot of people don't do the thing that they actually want to do and just do a job instead because of stability or whatever the case may be. And I always think about Jeff Bezos's regret minimization framework.
Oh, yeah.
Are you familiar? Okay, yeah. Which is like
thinking.
exactly. Which is if you're 80 years old and you're on your deathbed and you're thinking about your life, are you gonna regret more not trying something or like doing it? Like you're definitely gonna regret like not trying it versus like doing it. And so I think that was like what it came down to for me. But I definitely understand that there's safety in other things that you can do, like getting a corporate job, going to grad school. I would say if you feel like you need to learn more, then go do that. But if you feel like you have something that you're passionate about, like even if you don't know like a problem or a company that you're going to start, you're like, I'm definitely going to be in this space. I think that's enough to start a company actually. Because you start with a kernel and then the customers will give you the feedback. As long as you're like committed to the customer discovery process, the customers will give you feedback. You start talking to people, they will give you feedback. So it seems really risky when you're thinking about it and it seems like you don't know what you're doing. But as long as you have, I'm definitely going to be in this space. Like I was like, I'm definitely going to be in robotics. I'm definitely going to be in software for robotics that improves the performance. Who cares about that? And then you go find people who care about that. That's a narrow enough problem that like people certainly care about that. And you can see the value that comes out of that. And so yeah, YC is like encouraging a lot of people to start companies, and there's a lot of people having a lot of success coming out of undergrad or not even finishing undergrad. And so why not you? So that's how I think about it.
That was a fantastic response. So many amazing things that I'd like to ask about. So risk tolerance and your circumstances and a combination of those two. So you're out of grad school, you're done with your PhD at Michigan, and you're debt-free. You have this backup option. You can go back to your parents if you need to. And then you decide, I'm going to go and start this company. And then you got the fellowship at Cyclotron?
Yeah, Cyclotron Road.
Yeah.
It's Activate/Cyclotron Road.
Activate.
Yeah.
And could you just describe how you felt when you got that?
Oh my God.
When you got that? Can you take us back to when you got that? How you felt at the time?
Yeah. I don't want to minimize. Yeah, maybe I shouldn't minimize like how difficult it is to be in the wilderness. Yeah, I would say if you decide to start a company, you are committing to being in the wilderness. And the wilderness is tough. You like second guess yourself. You are like, why did I do this? This is stupid. No one respects me. No one cares if I fail or not. I should just go do something else. And so I was there for a while. And it's really important, maybe this is a good place to say this, it's really important to have like a support system. So like I said, my parents were really supportive. I think out of one side of their eyes, like, what are you doing? Okay, yeah, we're going to be supportive. But they were really supportive. And my fiance was really supportive. And I was like, yeah, you can do this. Keep going. So there was a point where I was like I was almost abandoning it. I was like, I need to go get a job. I'm not making any money. I need to go get a job and do something productive. And there was like, I think because I was caught in both these worlds of one, applying for a job and trying to get a job, and then two, trying to see if I could do this entrepreneurship thing, I didn't do either one of them well. And so I was just in this like middle land. And it wasn't until like I committed and I was like, I am going to do entrepreneurship that like things actually started happening. And yeah, it was like a process of maybe it was like 4 months-ish of this, can I really do this thing? And then I like committed and I applied to Activate, and that was actually the catalyst. So I'm glad that programs like Activate exist, because like when you apply to them, there's a forcing mechanism because you apply and then you're going to hear back 4 months later, and you're like, for them to accept me, I probably have to have made some progress within this. They probably want to see some progress within this 4 months, and that will make my application so much better. And so I think that was when I committed. I was like, okay, like I applied to this thing. If they're going to accept me, they're definitely going to want to see some progress. And so let me start making some progress. And so, yeah, started making some progress, try to find a co-founder, started getting some customers. And it was like, oh, actually, this is like working. And it forces you to streamline your thinking. This is like working. And I had a few interviews with Activate, and it seemed like they were interested in what I was doing. And I was like, okay, this is going well. And And then actually like me, because I was still me at the time. It's just Reforge Robotics was Nosa at the time. But I raised like $500K in funding, and like in the same week heard back from Activate that I'd gotten the fellowship. And so it was like this huge like vindication moment of, okay, for the last year I've been like trying to do this thing and it hasn't been working, and it hasn't been working, and it hasn't been working, and then all in 1 week it's like we're here and it's actually going to happen. And so that was, it was really big. And so I guess like maybe the takeaways from that is there's a lot of time where it feels like nothing's happening. But as long as you have a plan and you're like making progress towards that plan, and also you're thinking big about your vision, like you're thinking about a really large problem that you want to solve and you're telling people about that, you're committing to it. It takes a while for things to get going. It takes a while to gather the resources, but there's so many programs and there's so much money, y'all. There's so much. There's like billions and billions of dollars that people want to give to people who are younger because they're older. They can't do anything with it. But they want to invest so they can make more money. And so there's a lot of people who are willing to give you money to do the thing that you want to do. And the money is just like not the issue at all. And you don't realize this until you have some money. It's like, oh, actually, the money's not the issue. It's like really having the idea and like working on the problem. So I would say just keep grinding away on your problem and you will find an accelerator, a angel investor, someone will back you. Just keep working on your problem. That's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think the point that you talked about, like all in, is really important because
Yeah.
I just realized that as long as like you're all in and then you're all devoted to one thing, then like you're more focused and you're more likely to succeed in what you do.
Yeah. Mark Andreessen, who's like an investor, always says like, when you focus on something, the universe conspires to like make it happen for you. And I think that's actually true.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you just mentioned something really optimistic, which is you have to focus on something that's a grand vision, and that leads into something else that we wanted to talk about, which is your grand vision, or your like what do you think is the future of like factories, manufacturing? What does the future factory look like 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah, that's great. I love talking about this. I think that the reason why we exported manufacturing is because no one wants to do it. And the reason why we have a labor shortage in manufacturing, there's 500,000 jobs open in manufacturing. And by 2030, it would be like 2.5 million jobs open in manufacturing. Is because no one really wants to do it. Like people would rather be making YouTube videos or, so I don't say that derogatory. I mean that they would rather be expressing themselves creatively. Humans would rather express themselves creatively. And so I think we leave the things to the robots that the robots are really good at, and we do the things that we are really good at, and we are really good at creative things. And so the vision for a factory is basically like an AWS fulfillment center, or maybe even more automated than an AWS fulfillment center, where you want to make something and you send your part to, or you design it, maybe you design it with AI, right? Now we have AI tools that can help you design whatever you want to make. So maybe you just tell a computer what you want to make, and then that can be sent to a factory. And then the robots just figure out how to execute what you want to make. So let's say you need to cut metal. They'll find the metal piece that you need to cut. They'll bring in, the robots are all doing this, no one's coordinating this. The robots are moving the metal from the place that they are stocked into the place that they're going to be cut. One robot is going to cut that and then take it to the next station. And then maybe there's a drilling task that needs to be done. And you do that and you move to the next station. And then maybe you need to sand or polish. And then it gets put into a package out the door. So like all the building blocks are already there for all this to come together. There's a lot of AI that we are using in manufacturing. Amazon is already doing robotics. In fact, I was gonna, if I would have gone there, I would have worked on robotics for fulfillment centers. And so they're already like good at sorting packages with robots and automating that with robots. And so you can use a lot of those same tools in manufacturing when you have the main task being done by a robot. And then you can stream together a bunch of these robots together. So I had this vision of factories that are basically lights out. Like you don't need to turn on the lights. You don't need to see what's going on in the factory. The robots are actually just operating in the dark. They don't need to see anything. They know how things are configured. They know where things are. And so they can operate autonomously. Maybe you do need lights actually, because they have to be able to, maybe you use computer vision to see what's going on in the scene. So maybe you do need lights, but people don't need to be there. You maybe need one supervisor to just make sure that everything's going okay. But yeah, once we have that, like, I think, I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I think that there's an era of like robotics that's like brewing. I think we're still in the prototyping stage in terms of like humanoid robots and self-driving cars. I think there's going to be a lot more robots that are used in the everyday world, in every home, every restaurant. And so in order to be able to make those robots, we're going to need a manufacturing like infrastructure in our economy. And I think what better way to to have that manufacturing infrastructure be built than with robots themselves. So robots making robots that are going to kind of help us do all the things that we don't want to do so that we can focus on the things that we do want to do, which is being creative, writing, making podcasts, thinking. Yeah, so that's how I think about 5 to 10 years from now.
Yeah.
That's our vision. Yeah.
Just like on the point of automation, I have another question, because you mentioned if people are like freed from doing those physical works, they can do more creative works like YouTube and videos. There are, like, at the same time, there are also worries surrounding job replacement. So what's your like reaction to those common worries or concerns?
Yeah, it's a real concern. So I'm not going to minimize it by saying people will do other things. It's a real concern because the way I think about it is, so I'm an engineer, so I think about, and specifically, I'm a controls engineer. And so there are always what we call transients, and then there's like a steady state. So the transients are like when you turn on the machine, what happens? Or when you start moving, what happens? And then the steady state is, okay, when you reach operation level, like what's happening? So I think the transients of like automation and like automating things and people losing jobs, like that's going to be quite rough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's going to be quite rough because like people need to like rescale and do, like, maybe you've been doing a job for 10 years or 20 years and now like there's something else that can do that job better than you. Like economically, it doesn't make sense for the company to continue doing it the old way. And so there's going to be these transients that are going to be pretty rough, I think. But like the bigger picture is that looking like 5 years out, 10 years out, is like there are going to be new jobs created, right? So like for us, for example, like we're going to need a lot of people to program those robots, right? If we're going to have robot factories that are operating autonomously, we're going to need a lot of programmers to write the software that's going to do all those things. Like I said, drilling, I said milling, I said polishing, sanding. Like these are all different applications that have very unique maybe intricacies or nuances. And so you're going to need a bunch of people who are going to like program robots. That's like just one example. Maybe, I don't know what the sort of landscape of things is going to look like, but we've always had job loss and we've always had new jobs created. Like even now, like prompt engineer is like a job, right? And this was like, what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, those large language models started to come out, and now we have new jobs of prompt engineer and so on. So I think there's always going to be new jobs, but it just takes a while. There's going to be some transients. You're an economist, so there's going to be some rough, bumpy transients, but I think eventually like we land out in a better place where we have higher quality of life. Jobs are much more meaningful. More people will be able to reach self-actualization, right? What we were talking about earlier of people, a lot of people doing stuff that they didn't want to do. They had this dream, they had this vision of something that they wanted to do, but felt like they had to do this job otherwise. So maybe we get to a place where like people never have to do a job that they don't want to do, and they can actually just work on the things that they want to work on and know that they're going to be taken care of. I don't know exactly what that, there's a lot of like elements to that, but I think it's always been the case that technology improves quality of life, and that I don't see that changing, at least in the long term.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's very inspiring, and a lot of people could use some inspiring messages today, so that's we definitely appreciate that, especially robotics students, I think they could use some inspiration too. Yeah. And I think that's really inspiring to them as well. And I just have to ask, on behalf of my roommates who are robotics majors, and I think you laid out like a really great map of what they should be focusing on. And just for, Devin and Pranav, if you guys are listening to this, this is for you guys. But yeah, so what should robotics students be focusing on so that they could not be automated by some of these tools in the future, so that they can develop real skills? And I guess we generalize it too to just all students are afraid of picking a major that might not be a job for them in the future once they graduate. And what would you recommend to students who are worried about this? What should they study?
Yeah, this is a really great question. I think I have two answers. One is you should go out of your way to practice like the meta skill of learning. I guess a way to approach that is don't only learn the things that you're learning in your classroom, but try to like practice using those same learning skills in other domains. So like things you're interested in. So maybe it is robotics, maybe you want to do like a robot project on the side and you need to learn all the things that you need to be able to do to make that happen. But there's like this skill that is above all of it, and that's like being able to learn anything super quickly. Because then you're like, because if your thing gets disrupted, then you move on to the next thing and you can learn that pretty quickly and then just keep going. So I think that's probably the most important skill, is just like feeling very confident that you can learn anything in a short amount of time. Because then, who can replace you, right? Because you just move on to the next thing. And I think the other thing that you don't realize until you start being out in the real world is like, you need to be able to tell stories. You have to be able to tell stories. The people who are going to support you, and it's going to be people, robots are not going to support you. The robots are going to work on behalf of you, but they're not like in the hierarchy of things. Like humans are always going to be at the top of the food chain. And hopefully robots are going to be at the bottom, but
a lot of great signs.
Hopefully, if all goes well, robots are going to be at the bottom. And you'll still always need to convince people that they should fund you, that they should go in the direction that you want to go in. And that's all about telling the story of where you want to go and telling the story of why we're here and where we're going and what people should be concerned about. There's just a lot to, we think of like politicians and like people who do public speaking as, whatever. But like the skill of being able to convince people to vote for you or to like support you in some way, it's all being able to tell a compelling story that moves people to an emotion that compels them to actually do something. And like presidents are really good at this, right? Donald Trump is really good at this. Barack Obama was really good at this. Joe Biden, I think Joe Biden had a lot going for him. But I would say to some extent he was really good at this, like standing at a podium and telling a story about where the nation is going, right? So if you have the opportunity to take like a storytelling class, do that. It's so important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, I never even knew that they had storytelling classes.
They do. There's it's like a whole world out there of like storytelling. There's like storytelling coaches. There's whole firms that are dedicated to storytelling because it is such an important. From the beginning of time, people have been telling stories, and so it's the way you move. It's actually the way you move civilization along, right? The idea of a government is a story, right? There's no physical thing that is the government. The government is a story that we believe, right? The country,
is a story.
The United States is a story. It's a fiction. Money is a story. It's paper. So it's all a story. And so to be able to convince people to believe that this is your story and this is right is a really important skill.
Just a matter of who has the most convincing power.
Exactly. It's a huge thing. Yeah. So anyway, I'd say learning and storytelling.
Yeah, that's so like fun. The idea that a lot of these things that we take for granted exist within the context of a story of what we tell ourselves, and how we interact with one another is part of that story too, which is really something very fascinating to think about that not everybody does on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I know.
So thank you for that. Yeah, and then so I guess we can move on. And then there's something that we came across in our research, which is you taught, and I think you mentioned this earlier, that you taught for a year in Ghana. And I'm curious, what did you find most fulfilling about teaching there?
6 months, because Michigan wouldn't let me take off
6
a
months.
year.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. 6 months.
What I find most fulfilling about teaching there, I think it was like the opportunity to, wow, there's so many things. Probably the opportunity to like learn from students in a different context. Yeah, one of the reasons I really like traveling is that, and I learned this while I was in Ghana, is that you can just place yourself in a different context and like experience people living in a completely different way than you live. Like things you've never thought about, things you don't consider to be important are important to them. Things that you consider to be super important are like not important to them at all. So like one example, and this will resonate for maybe the African members of your audience, is that there's this concept of like timeliness in the United States and maybe in other places, but definitely in the United States. And timeliness is actually associated with an economic outcome. So the way we value a lot of people is by an hourly wage. And so exactly, an efficiency, right? And so this whole idea of like you get paid per hour for what you do like creates a certain context around being timely. So because time is basically equivalent to money. Whereas in Ghana and other places around the world, it's more like you get paid on a monthly basis or you get paid on a yearly basis. And so there's not as much, as long as you get your work done in the month, great. And so there's not as much attached to each hour, each minute as there is here. And so, yeah, it was just like a different pace of life, I guess, there. Like students were more concerned about taking their time to like really understand than moving on from one homework assignment to the next homework assignment, because they didn't feel this sort of time pressure that we had. So I think that's just one example, but I think just the like placing myself in a completely different context to have a different perspective on the world that I wouldn't normally have in my context was one thing. Let me think of another thing. I think maybe the other thing is that we're really fortunate here in terms of the resources that we have access to educationally. So a lot of courses at the university that I was teaching at, engineering courses, robotics courses, your assessment was basically only testing, so only exams. Whereas like I think if you're doing more engineering, more maybe like hands-on majors, like you usually have a project component to the course and you get to build something that you can show on your portfolio. You get to get the practice of like really implementing what you're learning in class. Whereas in Ghana, it was just like testing, right? You just memorize stuff and then you test. And that doesn't, at least as an engineer, I can say that doesn't stick as much as like when you made something and you tried it and you tested it and it worked. And you're like, oh, okay, this is not only in the books, but it's actually in the real world, the concepts actually work. The physics works, the chemistry works or whatever, right? And I think I realized that, it's really important to have resources. And that's actually part of the journey to starting Reforge Robotics, is that I was like, you really need to be able to make stuff everywhere in the world. Because if they had access to be able to manufacture things, it wouldn't be that difficult to get resources. Because right now they're importing everything into the country. Whereas if you were able to make stuff there, it opens up a lot of access to resources and educational opportunities as well. So I would say maybe those are two things that I learned while I was there.
Yeah, and you touched on that of like democratizing manufacturing in some of your blogs that you wrote too.
I think along the lines of the question around what you do next, you're graduating, what are you going to do next? And a lot of people spend a lot of time thinking about that question. I'm still developing these thoughts, but I would say that starting a business, starting a company is like a huge personal development journey disguised as like a money-making endeavor. So if you really want to go deep and discover who you are, starting a business is like a great way to do that. Because you have to.
Yeah.
You have to basically communicate yourself to other people. That's why I talked about storytelling earlier. You have to like understand yourself in order to communicate yourself to other people. And so that like forces you to like go in to your past. Like, who am I? Like, where did I come from? Where am I going? And so it's a really useful thing to do. And related to that, I guess there's maybe a central theme in this conversation is this idea of self-actualization, and how I talked about people who I knew in the past, or I guess I still know, but feel like they had dreams that were unfulfilled, or feel unsatisfied in the role that they're in, the job that they're in. I think it really comes down to they're not self-actualizing. And that looks different for everybody. That might not be a company for everybody. You might not need to start a company, but you want to be in a place where you're like, the thing I'm doing every day, I'm like excited every single day that I wake up. I was at dinner with like my pastor and some other folks yesterday, and they're talking about coffee. Like, I'm not a coffee drinker, and they're like, how do you like get up in like in the morning and like all this stuff? And I was like, I'm like literally excited about life. Like, I don't even sleep. I don't remember the last time I like heard my alarm in the morning. Like, my alarm woke me up. I get up before my alarm because I'm so ready to go.
Yeah.
And I think there is that for everybody. There's like a thing that is on your heart, that's on your mind, that if you're doing that, you're just so excited about what you're gonna do that day that you can barely sleep. And force yourself in a way to discover that by like never doing something for too long that you're unsatisfied with. So you probably don't know exactly what your self-actualization thing looks like when you feel unsatisfied. There's like a mystical sort of like spiritual thing that like keeps you satisfied with the things that you like and unsatisfied with the things that you don't like. And so I would say just like listening to that and like moving in the direction that feeling is taking you is like a really important thing for living a fulfilled life. And yeah, I don't have a general theory about this, but like I've been thinking about how to live a fulfilled life for a very long time. And I think Reforge Robotics is like part of that. Obviously like my family's part of that. My fiance is part of that. But yeah, I think there's like just a lot of life to live, and like everyone should be trying to live it to the fullest at every single time and not waiting for some future, I don't know, when you're 50 or something like that to live your full life. You can live your full life the whole time. And I would encourage people to like follow their heart, almost follow their desires to find that. That sounds really cliche.
But that's really inspiring.
Yeah, I think that's guys, find what you're passionate about, what excites you every single morning to get up, and
the alarm.
And I think that's such an inspiring place to end. So I think thank you so much, Nosa, for everything that you've shared. You've been incredibly kind with your time today. So thank you so much. I appreciate
thank you guys. Thank you.
Okay. Wow.